Introducing health and wellness advocate, veteran international real estate investment expert, author and speaker, Adiel Gorel.
Health tips, fitness tips, nutrition and well-being, world-class experts, all right here on my podcast, The Adiel Gorel Show. Hi, everybody. We are very fortunate today to have with us Anat Baniel. You know, Anat Baniel's work is at the forefront of the emerging brain plasticity field and the understanding of the role of movement in our health and vitality. Over the past 35 years, Anat has worked with athletes, musicians, and other high performance, as well as with adult and children suffering from back pain, injuries, brain trauma, stroke, and many other conditions. Her studies started out with collaboration with Dr. Moshé Feldenkrais. He was a pioneer in brain plasticity and movement sciences. Combined with her breakthrough outcomes with her clients and the work with him led Anat to develop the Anat Baniel Method NeuroMovement, which provides both theory and practice supported by current brain plasticity science. Anat was trained as a clinical psychologist and dancer and was a student, then a close professional associate of Dr. Moshé Feldenkrais for many years. She's the author of the best-selling Move into Life, NeuroMovement for Lifelong Vitality, and the highly acclaimed Kids Beyond Limits. She has trained hundreds of practitioners, me being one of them, who are practicing all over the world. And so, yeah, we'll also add that last year I created a public television show by the name of Life 201, and I was going to invite 8 great experts to the show. Needless to say, Anat was one of the great experts. So Anat and I worked on that show. The show is still running in many big cities in the US. But anyway, Anat, it's really a pleasure, to have you here with us.
I'm thrilled to be with you. I'm thrilled to be part of your upcoming podcast. And of course, to have a conversation with you is always fantastic.
So Anat, you, of course, I know your work quite well firsthand. I was trained by you. And still though, for our viewers, if you can tell us about your path, how did it start and how did you come to where you are now, where you can help thousands of people worldwide?
Well, as you mentioned, I was trained both in dance. I was considering dance as a career, and I was trained as a clinical psychologist. And I was actually also studied statistics that I mentioned because it sounds so off the path, but it had big influence, and maybe we can talk about it a little later in which terms, studying that had it. But I was wanting to work with people. And as I was progressing in my graduate studies to become a psychotherapist through clinical psychology studies, I experienced it more and more that it was words and it was important, and the words were the means of trying to reach our own experience and impact ourselves and our learning and our path. And what was missing for me was the direct physical, kinesthetic, sensory experience that is outside of words. I mean, you can describe it, but it has its own existence and it's so immediate. And so I started searching I went and took workshops in drama therapy and in Reichian therapy and all kinds of physical related approaches. And they didn't quite cut it for me. And I was always interested in the brain, and I took courses in anatomy and neuroanatomy and physiology in the medical school, parallel to my studies. But neurology, I talked to neurologists and I realized they have no idea about human behavior, you know, and and especially in those years, I mean, it was so nowhere. And then I remembered as a child, my dance teacher was a student of Dr. Feldenkrais. So she taught us, the little girls, I think when I started, I was maybe 8 or 9 or something like that, 7 maybe, the lesson on the floor. And I loved it. And it had profound impact on me, mood-wise, things I could do in gymnastics that I couldn't do before. It was like amazing experience, but I was a little girl, you know, so, you know, you have the parents you have the school you have, and then I had that. And it took 6 months of me searching until it surfaced. And I remembered, I knew the name, Dr. Feldenkrais, and I knew that my father was a close friend of Moshé. So I called my father up and I said, is Feldenkrais still alive? And he said, to the best of my knowledge, he is. So I said, where can I find him? He said, look him up in the Tel Aviv, you know, in Israel, Tel Aviv phone book. So I looked him up in the phone book and I went to where he taught classes and I said to him, I want to study with you. And he had no trainings. And so I started with private lessons. And I got the very first private session with him. And I knew that that's what I need to learn. I still thought that I was going to bring his work as part of my psychotherapist work, like as a psychotherapist. So I kept with my studies in the university. And I worked as a psychologist for the Israeli army. I mean, there was a whole thing. But as I knew more and more, all I learned in psychology has and still been useful for me, but this is it. And I realized it's the brain and its way to communicate with the brain, and the concept of neuroplasticity or brain change was not even in existence. And but that's what it was all about. So movement and brain change.
Well, and then if you can tell us a little bit more about the path. So you started to work with Feldenkrais, you got private sessions, so you could feel it on your own body, you could see where it was going. But still, you've come a very long way to be pretty much, for me, the leading force in that kind of realm. Yeah. Yes. So if you can tell us a little bit about, your path.
Of course. So I continued this studying, doing my grad school. And for a year and a half, I didn't have much money. I got a total of 9 private sessions from him, and I ran out of money. But he gave me permission to watch him work. So I would go once or twice a week and sit in the afternoon and just be very, very quiet, never open my mouth, and observe him. I had no idea what he was doing, but I felt everything he was doing. And it was really maybe the best way ever to learn. I didn't try to imitate. I knew I didn't know, but I watched people walk in and 25, 30 minutes later, leave and they were transformed. And I watched it over and over and over again. And I waited for a training to open. And then a training opened in San Francisco. So I flew to San Francisco and I took his training. And soon, and then of course I kept working with him. I kept working for the Israeli army as a way of making money and so on and so forth. And when you said, I felt it in my body, one of the things, the very first thing that I experienced, even though it was all kind of static and changes, but the feeling of change was emotional, was cognitive, it was like almost my being, right? So the separation between mind and body, between physical and intellectual or all this stuff just disappeared. So the experience was really a holistic, integrative experience that I could break down different aspects of it. And I was very aware of that. I was aware that I have no idea what he's doing in terms of any theory or any, technique. But the experience was enormous, just enormous. And so I did that. And then I started practicing on my friends, and so first of all, I had a little class in my little room in Jerusalem in my rented apartment. And my first class was 2 people. You know one of them very well, Eilat. And then, and I just taught and I watched what happened to people. So I did the lessons that I got, group lessons. And I saw the miraculous. I saw the transformation. I saw possibility. And really what I came to, and I think maybe today is the biggest axis of my work, is possibility. I don't know whether I'll get there or I'll help you get there. I don't know if it happens exactly the path. I don't know when it will happen, but I know the process that leads to open possibilities. And that's how I work with adults. That's how I work with children. That's how we work now with the schools that we work with, actually a few schools. But and that was very, very powerful. And then I was in grad school and I opened the classes, and a lot of the people were either my peers or my teachers. All my professors were interested in what I was doing. It was really remarkable. Some of them got Nobel Prize for the work. I mean, I had these amazing people on the floor and I was working with them. And then I was hired. The first place I was hired was the Academy of Music and Dance, because I was a dancer. So I worked with the dancers. And then I started working with musicians. So really what I worked with the population, I mostly worked with was high performers, academics, very brilliant people, musicians and dancers. And then my peers, lots of young people, and I just observed changes. And then I got to the place where I started using my hands. And then Feldenkrais needed to travel, and he was much older than me. I was in my 20s and he was in his 70s. And he needed help traveling. All of a sudden he became well known. So he was invited to the United Nations to give a presentation. He was invited to the US Senate to give a presentation, so on and so forth. And he needed help, I was a schlepper. I carried his bags. I jumped in the middle of the street to get a cab. That was my job. And of course I was present at everything. And we spent hours in airplanes and in, eating breakfast, lunch. And it was a unique experience, a rare opportunity. I mean, I was all in. I didn't think about it externally. I didn't see like unique opportunity. I just did it. I mean, if he had asked me to travel with him to, the Himalayas for 6 months and work on a project, I would have said yes. I mean, there was no question. So we talked a lot, and I got to asking questions more and more. And it was just an absorption process that was remarkable, and he was my mentor. I was a lot younger, but we became also very close friends. It was really beautiful. And in those travels, we stayed, this woman in New York on Central Park West had an apartment. And she had a very large apartment, many bedrooms, and she's invited me and Moshé to stay with her. How she knew about him, I don't remember, it doesn't matter. And they brought in Elizabeth, parents. There was an article about his work in the Smithsonian magazine about a child that he did a demo in a workshop, an 11-year-old child. So they brought Elizabeth. She was 13 months old, diagnosed global brain damage, couldn't do a thing, cried. She was actually in pain. People didn't know.
Global brain damage. Please tell us what that would normally mean.
Well, what it means from my world is that she didn't do much of anything. She was not developing. She was not rolling over. If you put her on her belly, she couldn't pick up her head, her eyes crossed. She was spastic on the left side of her body. and didn't progress. I mean, she was stuck. She was 13 months old, and she was like a newborn, except she was 13 months old. So, and of course she got therapy and she got diagnosed and she got everything else. It doesn't mean really anything. It just means that people said her brain is not doing what it's supposed to do. So it's a terrifying diagnosis. That was one of my first encounters. You know, I end up now, one of my big specialties is working with children with special needs, is how wrong using this term was. Because nobody knew that the brain is globally damaged. And of course now she has two master's degrees, and she's married, and she's walking and talking and has a small business, you know, out of their home. So it's like, and every child, if you look at a newborn child and they can't do what they are going to do when they're 20, you can say they're global brain damage, but it has nothing to do with it. Eventually, what really happened was she's missing. It's a structural deformity of the brain that finally, when they did MRI, she's missing a third of her cerebellum. And the cerebellum is a very, very, very important part of the brain, like most parts, but it's very important. It's in the lower centers. So missing lower centers is very serious. So the brain couldn't find its way. And through work, consistent work over a good number of years, she ended up going to school and ended up going to high school and ended up, you know, she started walking independently. She was somewhere between 8 to 9 years old, which is sort of unheard of kind of thing. She was my school because, so what happened, they brought her, she cried. I picked her up, she stopped crying. Feldenkrais could work on her. The same thing happened the next day. And then the third day, he asked me, will you hold her for me? He didn't tell me. He was like this Jewish Zen scientist teacher. He didn't talk much. He didn't explain much. He just acted. And he started referring all the children that came to him to me. And he said to the parents, if you want me to see your child, you will continue working with Anat. So all of a sudden I started getting all those kids, and I figured out what happened. I wasn't trained how to work with children. I was working with musicians and dancers and, you know, brilliant people. And, but he sent them to me, so I trusted him. And it was magical. It was really magical because it was a wide open field. The one thing I could do is observe the child and connect with the child, use what I learned from him. That was the basis from which, you know, I did it, and just dance with the child. And the children started rolling, but like popping. They start saying words for the first time. They, you know, so I just followed that path. And I moved to New York, and by word of mouth, you know, because they lived in Chicago, my whole practice was Chicago, children with special needs. And about 15 years, 10, I think, I didn't expect it, so I didn't measure it, but about 10, 15 years into doing this, I continued with adults. I worked with in Tangled Music Festival. I worked, you know, with orchestras. I mean, that continued, but I'd work with people, and especially the children, and I'd go like, they would change. They were like that. And I always knew it was the brain. I knew the changes are in the brain. So I started inquiring, this is a bit your background. I talked to physicists, what does quantum mean? What does grades of energy mean? Because the changes were quantum changes and very, very interesting. Anyway, so after many years, I looked at it, I asked myself, what is it that I'm doing that works? Because it works. I know what I'm doing. I know what my intention is. But my question is, what about what I'm doing works? I took a year and worked on it for a year. I actually had a person, a thought leader that didn't know anything about my work, and I told him what I know. I kept, and that's how I extracted the 9 essentials. Because I went like, okay, so what am I providing the child, the adult? What conditions, what am I doing that wakes up the brain to operate in such a spectacular way? Because you take a child that's missing a third of their cerebellum, they won't walk. This is it has a name, it has a diagnosis, it can be less or more. I saw some children with these diagnoses because, you know, they heard about my work with Elizabeth that came to me, but they were already 6 or 7. And oh my God, terrible, terrible. And with work with them, they did improve, but to get to where Elizabeth was, it would have taken hundreds of lessons and a long time, and probably not the same place. But because we caught that brain when it was forming, it was much easier for the brain to take over. It took a good number of years. She started talking, she started understanding language and sounding words, but to speak clearly and fluently, it took, you know, 4 or 5 years.
By the way, I don't want to scare our viewers, as I've seen this work make enormous difference for people, any people. You talked about working with high performance people, musicians, athletes. Now you talk about kids with special needs, but the majority of people are normal or in some way or another based on what that is. And, you know, on the television show, I demonstrated one of the exercise, not one of the movements that we will be doing. And I got the whole crowd of 60 people to be able to reach about a foot further down their leg, you know, towards their toes or the floor without trying or trying hard in about 30 seconds.
Exactly.
That's the thing. I want the viewers to realize this is practical, this is usable for every single one of us.
Oh, absolutely.
Just a comment on the side, everybody I've seen who does this work seems younger than their chronological age.
Absolutely. We can get to that because this is, we can talk about a vibrant brain and a youthful brain versus an aging brain. And we can talk, and many people talk about it now. We have our own entry point into, entryway into it. I worked with Olympic athletes. I worked with, you know, top performing dancers with enormous changes. I can tell a quick story. It's a very well-known troupe, and she was at the time the principal dancer. And I was teaching a training in practitioner training in Chicago. So her teacher, who was in my training actually, you know, the master teacher of this group, she asked for her to come and watch the work and then have me demonstrate on her. And she was a principal dancer. I mean, she was good, but she had one thing that she was years, and she could, no matter how many 1 and 2s and stretches, and it didn't change. There's a movement in ballet where you take the one leg, you stand on one leg and one leg goes behind, you know, and the arm goes forward, you know, to balance and so on. It's called arabesque. So she could do the arabesque with her standing on the left leg, lifting the right leg up beautifully, almost like splits, right? But when she stood on the right leg to lift the left leg, it was like maybe 30, 40 degrees lower. It was a real difference. And she showed it to me. And then in standing with her hands on a chair, so she didn't have to worry about balance, I did just a few variations of movement that I knew were relevant to the ability to lift the leg. I didn't ever practice lifting the leg. And in 5 minutes, she had both legs lifting as high.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
And she's been working on it for years before.
Oh yeah, since she was a child.
Okay, so that brings me back again. I'm going to jump a little bit. I had a couple of questions. I'll get to them, but let's go to the demonstration that I gave on Live 201 on the television show. So basically, I'm even going to describe it visually.
How about I take people through it right now? Or you take them through it?
Yeah, but you know, the example I gave on the show, we had to stand up.
Yeah, but you can do it in sitting.
Yeah, let's do it right now. That's much better, of course.
Do you want the down or do you want the twist? People
The down and up. That's what I showed on TV. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so people, if they're driving, you can't do it, and please don't. You know, if people are listening to it. But if you're sitting, make sure the chair is away from the furniture, right? And you can do it too, Adi. So I guide you. Yeah, and then do a very simple movement. You say the feet spread, the knees spread. Put your hands between your knees. Sit at the edge of the chair, and then simply bend down without stretching. Just bend down towards the floor, as if you want to reach something in the floor. And then come back up. And then do it one more time. Bend down. And come back. And now do the following. Still at the edge of the chair, lean with your right forearm on your right thigh. So I'm doing it myself right now. So lean with the right forearm, about in the middle of the forearm, and make sure that you have your weight coming through the arm, through the forearm. So you're helping yourself stay up by leaning on the arm. And now put your left hand in front of you. So I'm going to show it like this. Left hand in front of you, shoulder height.
Yeah.
And now keep leaning on the forearm and slowly twist yourself up, left hand towards the ceiling, and the eyes follow the hand, and come back. And now many people will do it, they will really shorten the neck. So see if you can arch your back as you do the movement, so your neck doesn't get all crunched. And come back. And do it one more time. Arch the back, roll the pelvis forward, look at the arm. And now simply, first of all, sit for a couple seconds up and feel if your right side already feels like different than the left side. And which side? One shoulder maybe feels wider, maybe you're having more weight on one buttock and so on. And now simply spread the legs wide enough so you have a room. Go down with the two arms to the floor and see if one arm goes easier and further to the floor than the other. Yep,
the right one.
Okay, and for some people it might be the left one, depends how they did it. But let's do another movement. So you lean again. I'm going to keep it so it's different between one side to the other. So lean on your right forearm again, on your thigh. And now, when you roll the pelvis forward and bring the arm up, turn the head to look the other way, the head and the eyes, and then come back to the middle. And see, Adi, if you can, next time you do it, you lift the arm to the ceiling, not sideways, because that's when you're working your neck instead of your back. And then come back, and do it one more time. So you lift it up, straight up, and you turn your head to the floor. And now simply go down and see which side goes easier down.
Yep.
Yeah. And do you generally go further down altogether?
Yes.
Okay. So we did a couple movements, right? Variations. And by the way, do one more movement. Lift your left arm up and feel what it's like. That's it. And feel how much you're using now. I can see your back and your lower back. And now lift the right arm and see if one arm is easier than the other.
Oh, yeah. Big difference.
You feel the difference?
Yes.
And we even didn't practice this movement, so to speak. So, I mean, we did in a way. So that's an example. When we give the brain the information it needs, or the conditions where it can actually generate the information it needs, The changes are instantaneous.
So I would like to still describe what we did on the show, because knowing there were going to be 60 people there on national TV, I wanted to pick one move that's the simplest possible one. So this is what we did. We were standing up and the people at home followed as well. All we did was we just reached down to the floor with everything. You know, we just went down, no straining, and gently we could see how far we could reach. Some people could reach down to their knees, some people to their ankles, some people to the floor. And then all I asked them to do, this is of course a movement I learned from you. When they went down to the floor, only the head and the eyes, only the eyes looked up when they were going down, and then down when they were going up. They did it twice. It took 20 seconds. Okay. And then I just said, do the original movement, just reach down to the floor, and the TV cameras were demonstrating 1 foot. Most of them could reach 1 foot more in the space of less than 30 seconds. So now maybe you can tell us what happened here.
Okay. All right. Well, in order to have voluntary controlled movement, because we learn to move, babies can't do anything voluntary to begin with. The first thing they do is sucking, and the eye movement comes in very quickly to control, starting to get control. But in general, to reach down to the floor while standing or sitting, or to anything we do, and of course speech is extremely complex, there's an underlying process that happens in the brain without which nothing can occur. And the basic, what it is we need to notice, that means discrimination. Then there comes differentiation, which is extremely important. Many people tend to miss that part, and then there is the integration. What does that mean? Take the hand of a baby. The hand of a baby moves, but really what it can do in the beginning is it gets fisted or it lets go. That hand, in not too many years, could play a Chopin sonata. In the beginning, the child can't do anything but move all the fingers together as one. It already has all the bones and all the muscles that it will have later. Nothing, the structure
I'm gonna jump in. I am fascinated by this, and there's a lot, to learn, but if you can simplify it.
Okay, I'll simplify it.
Sentences. What happened? Why could they reach?
Okay, what happened is people have learned how to bend down, and they move their body, big parts of the body, as a big lump. So the spine, the abdomen muscles get contracted, the ribs, you lose freedom. And then you can move only in certain joints, and you do it over and over again, and very often it gets overworked and you get pain, and then it gets more restricted and so on. When you ask them to move and ask them to not make an effort, you also woke them up to be more sensitive to what they feel, which is very, very important. So when we want to improve our performance, including physical exercise performance, reducing force is extremely important in the learning process. Then what you did, you asked them to do the exact old way that they did, but you asked them to do a differentiation, which is bringing the eyes up. Now, it also so happens that a third of the visual cortex, a third of the cerebral cortex is visual. A big part of the brain, and the visual cortex is highly interconnected with the rest of the brain. So when you ask them to do something that looks like totally irrelevant to the movement they're trying to do, people will try to stretch their hamstrings or stretch their back muscles, or, to try to go lower. You just gave some freedom in the system. And when you change the relationship between the movement of the eyes to the habitual movement of the eyes in relation to the movement that was done, there's enormous freedom that happens to the brain. So then since you did it slow and you did it gentle and you took out the desire, to touch the floor and stretch and all that stuff, the brain just used the information. We're like, wow, I don't have to do it this way, I can do it this way.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. Thank you for joining us today. I know you love what's coming next in part 2. Be sure to click the subscribe button for more videos.